Jack Sullivan stood in knee-deep snow, staring at the most pathetic sight he'd ever encountered. A 1975 mobile home that looked like it had been through 3 wars and lost every single one. The asking price was $350, which happened to be exactly what remained in his bank account. After the divorce, the job loss, and 6 months of barely scraping by on unemployment benefits. The seller, a trembling old man with wild eyes, kept glancing over his shoulder as if expecting something terrible to emerge from the Arkansas wilderness surrounding them. Scout, Jack's German shepherd, planted himself firmly in the snow and refused to take another step toward the rusted metal structure. His hackles raised and a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. The old man fumbled with shaking hands as he pulled out a set of keys that looked older than the mobile home itself. $350, he kept muttering, like he was trying to convince himself it was worth even that much. Jack could smell the desperation rolling off him in waves, mixed with something else. Fear, maybe, or guilt. Please support us by liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more incredible veteran stories. Scout's ears were pinned back against his skull, and he kept looking between Jack and the mobile home, as if trying to communicate something urgent. When Jack reached for the keys, the old man practically threw them into the snow and took several steps backward. "Don't say I didn't warn you about the curse," the man whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind, howling through the pine trees. He turned and hurried toward his pickup truck without another word, leaving Jack standing there with his life savings scattered in the form of crumpled bills and his dog acting like they were about to enter a haunted house. The mobile home's windows were dark and somehow seemed to be watching them, and there was a smell in the air that made Jack think of old pennies and something far worse that he couldn't quite identify. Jack Sullivan had served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a special operations engineer, the kind of soldier who could build bridges under enemy fire or disarm improvised explosive devices while mortar rounds exploded overhead. He'd come home with commendations, PTSD, and a German shepherd named Scout who had saved his life more times than he could count during their deployment together. Scout wasn't just any military working dog. He was a bomb detection specialist with an almost supernatural ability to sense danger, whether it came in the form of buried explosives or hostile combatants planning an ambush. After returning to civilian life, Jack had tried to rebuild himself as a construction engineer, using his military skills to design and build structures that could withstand natural disasters. For a while, it had worked. He'd married his high school sweetheart, bought a house in Little Rock, and thought he'd figured out how to translate his wartime purpose into peacetime success. But PTSD doesn't follow a schedule or respect good intentions, and the nightmares, flashbacks, and sudden rages had slowly eaten away at everything he'd tried to build. The divorce had been ugly and expensive, costing him the house, half his savings, and most of his self-respect. His wife had gotten tired of being married to a man who woke up screaming in the middle of the night and couldn't handle crowded spaces or unexpected loud noises. She'd tried to be understanding at first, but understanding has its limits when you're dealing with someone who's fighting a war that ended years ago. The job had gone next. Construction sites are full of sudden noises and potential hazards, and Jack's hypervigilance had turned from an asset into a liability when he started treating coworkers like potential threats. Now, standing in the snow outside this decrepit mobile home in the Ozark Mountains, Jack had Scout and $350 to his name. The mobile home was located 20 miles outside the small town of Buffalo, Arkansas, down a winding dirt road that disappeared into thick pine forest. There was no cell phone service, no internet, and the nearest neighbor was supposedly miles away through terrain that looked like it hadn't been touched by civilization since the Civil War. It was the kind of place where people went to disappear, which was exactly what Jack needed right now. Scout had been Jack's partner, protector, and often his only reason for staying alive since they'd served together in the mountains of Afghanistan. The dog had an uncanny ability to read Jack's moods and knew exactly when to provide comfort or when to alert him to genuine danger. During their deployment, Scout had detected 23 improvised explosive devices, saving not just Jack's life, but the lives of 156 other soldiers in their unit. When Jack had been critically wounded in their final mission, a roadside bomb that killed 2 of their teammates and left Jack with shrapnel scars that still ached in cold weather. Scout had stayed by his hospital bed for 3 months, refusing to leave even when the veterinarians came to examine him. The bond between them went deeper than the typical relationship between a soldier and his military working dog. They communicated without words, understood each other's signals and moods, and had saved each other's lives so many times that they'd stopped keeping count. Scout could sense Jack's PTSD episodes before they happened, placing his heavy head on Jack's chest during nightmares or positioning himself between Jack and potential triggers in crowded places. Jack, in turn, had learned to read Scout's body language like a book. Every twitch of his ears, every subtle change in posture meant something specific about their environment and potential threats. As Jack stood in the snow outside the mobile home, watching Scout's agitated behavior, he felt that familiar prickle of combat awareness creeping up his spine. Scout had never been wrong about danger, not once in all their time together. From Kandahar to Kabul, the dog had proven his ability to detect threats that human senses couldn't perceive. Now, in this isolated corner of Arkansas, Scout was sending the same unmistakable signals he'd used to warn about enemy ambushes and hidden explosives. "You sense something, don't you, boy?" Jack murmured, crouching down to run his hands through Scout's thick fur. The dog leaned into his touch but kept his eyes fixed on the mobile home, his entire body tense with alertness. "Whatever's in there, we'll face it together. We always do." Scout's tail gave a single, cautious wag, as if acknowledging their partnership, while maintaining his vigilance about whatever lay ahead. The first night in the mobile home was like stepping into a time capsule that someone had filled with bad memories and left to rot. The interior smelled of mildew, old grease, and something metallic that reminded Jack uncomfortably of dried blood. The previous owner had left everything behind: furniture covered in dust, a refrigerator full of food that had been rotting for what looked like years, and a calendar hanging on the kitchen wall that was stuck on October 2022. The place felt like its inhabitants had simply vanished in the middle of their daily routine, leaving behind half-finished meals and a coffee cup still sitting on the counter. Scout prowled through every room with the methodical intensity he'd shown when clearing buildings in Afghanistan, his nose working constantly as he cataloged scents and potential threats. The dog spent a particularly long time investigating the basement door, whining softly and pawing at the frame as if something down there demanded immediate attention. Jack tried the door handle and found it locked, but the wood around the frame was old and soft with moisture damage. Through the gap under the door came a draft of air that carried an even stronger version of that metallic smell, mixed with something else that made Jack's stomach turn. As Jack sat by the old wood-burning stove that first evening, trying to coax some heat from damp firewood, he found himself talking to Scout the way he had during those long, dangerous nights in Afghanistan. "Remember that night in Helmand Province when you wouldn't let me enter that compound?" Jack said, scratching behind the dog's ears. "You kept pulling on my gear, trying to drag me away. I thought you were just being cautious, but when we called in the explosive ordnance disposal team, they found enough C4 to level half the village." Scout rested his massive head on Jack's thigh, his dark brown eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. Those eyes had seen too much for any creature, human or animal, and carried a weight of experience that Jack recognized in his own reflection. They'd witnessed the worst of human nature, survived explosions and firefights, and watched good people die for reasons that often made no sense. But they'd also seen acts of incredible courage and sacrifice, moments when ordinary people became heroes because someone they cared about was in danger. The connection between them wasn't just friendship or even loyalty. It was the bond forged between warriors who depended on each other for survival in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. Scout could feel Jack's PTSD attacks building before Jack himself recognized the symptoms, and Jack had learned to read the subtle changes in Scout's behavior that indicated everything from incoming weather to potential threats. "You're the reason I'm still alive," Jack whispered into the dog's fur. "In Afghanistan, and here at home when I wanted to give up. Now I get the feeling you're trying to protect us from something new." Outside the mobile home's grimy windows, shadows moved through the pine trees in patterns that didn't match the wind. Scout lifted his head from Jack's lap and let out a low, warning growl that raised the hair on the back of Jack's neck. Someone or something was out there, watching them through the darkness. Jack reached for the old hunting rifle he'd found in the mobile home's bedroom closet, its familiar weight both comforting and alarming. He'd hoped his fighting days were over, but Scout's behavior suggested they were just beginning a different kind of war. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor in the form of Betty Morrison, a 70-year-old woman with kind eyes and the sort of smile that had seen too much sadness but refused to give up hope. She appeared at Jack's door carrying a plate of warm biscuits and a thermos of coffee that smelled like heaven after a night of subsisting on canned beans and instant soup. Betty moved with the careful precision of someone who'd spent decades navigating difficult terrain, both literal and metaphorical, and Scout's reaction to her presence was markedly different from his behavior around the mobile home itself. "You're the first person brave enough to stay overnight," Betty said, settling herself into one of the mobile home's rickety kitchen chairs, while Scout cautiously approached to sniff her outstretched hand. "Most folks who come to look at this place take one step inside and decide they'd rather sleep in their cars. There's something about this place that speaks to people's instincts, and usually those instincts are telling them to run as fast as they can in the opposite direction." Jack poured coffee from Betty's thermos and found himself studying her face, looking for the tells and micro-expressions that military training had taught him to recognize. She was nervous about something, but not afraid of him or Scout. If anything, she seemed relieved to have someone to talk to, as if she'd been carrying a burden alone for far too long. Betty told him about Harold Hendricks, the mobile home's previous owner who had vanished along with his entire family 3 years earlier, leaving behind a mystery that the local authorities had seemed strangely reluctant to investigate thoroughly. Harold was a retired miner, Betty explained, her voice dropping to a whisper as she glanced toward the windows as if expecting someone to be listening. "Good man, honest as they come, with a wife and teenage daughter who adored him. He'd spent 40 years working the mountains around here and knew every cave, stream, and game trail for 50 miles in any direction. But about 6 months before he disappeared, Harold started acting strange, paranoid, secretive, like he'd discovered something that scared him more than anything he'd encountered in 4 decades of dangerous underground work." Scout's ears perked up when Betty mentioned Harold's name, and the dog moved closer to her chair as if recognizing something familiar in her scent or tone of voice. Betty reached down to scratch Scout's head, and Jack noticed that her hand trembled slightly as she continued her story. "Harold came to me one evening, about a week before he vanished," Betty said. "He was carrying a metal box and looked like he hadn't slept in days. He told me he'd found something in the mountains, something that could make a lot of people very rich, but also something that certain people would kill to keep secret." The old woman's voice grew even quieter as she revealed the detail that made Jack's blood run cold. "Harold mentioned Detective Morrison by name," she whispered. Said Morrison had been asking too many questions about Harold's mining surveys and geological reports. Harold was convinced that Morrison was involved in something illegal, something big enough to justify murdering an entire family to keep it quiet. Betty reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished key that looked like it belonged to a safe deposit box or filing cabinet. "This opens whatever Harold hid in this mobile home," Betty said, pressing the key into Jack's palm. "He made me promise to give it to someone I trusted, someone who wouldn't be intimidated or bought off if the truth turned out to be dangerous. I've been waiting 3 years for the right person to come along, and when I saw you and this beautiful dog, I knew Harold would approve of my choice. But Jack," she gripped his wrist with surprising strength, "be very careful who you trust with whatever you find. There are people in this county who have a lot to lose if Harold's secrets come to light. After Betty left, promising to return the next day with more information and supplies, Jack and Scout began a systematic search of the mobile home. The key Betty had given him was small and brass, designed for a padlock or security box rather than a door or safe. Scout seemed to understand that they were looking for something specific, and he led Jack through the mobile home with the same focused intensity he'd shown when searching for explosive devices overseas. Every few minutes, Scout would stop at a particular spot and sniff carefully. His tail held straight and still in the classic pointing posture that indicated he'd detected something worth investigating. The basement door remained locked, but Jack's military engineering background included more than a few lessons in accessing secured areas when circumstances required it. The doorframe was soft with moisture damage, and a few strategic applications of leverage with a crowbar had the door swinging open within minutes. The basement smelled worse than the main floor. That metallic odor was much stronger down here, mixed with the musty scent of damp earth and something organic that had been decaying for a very long time. Scout descended the wooden stairs ahead of Jack, his nose working overtime and his body language indicating extreme caution rather than outright alarm. The basement was larger than Jack had expected, extending well beyond the footprint of the mobile home above and clearly hand-excavated by someone who knew their way around underground construction. Harold's mining background was evident in the careful way the space had been carved from the hillside, with proper drainage and structural support that would have taken months of skilled labor to complete. In the far corner of the basement, partially concealed behind an old furnace that had been disconnected years earlier, Jack discovered what the key was meant to open. A metal storage box, about the size of a small filing cabinet, secured with a heavy-duty padlock that looked much newer than anything else in the mobile home. Scout's behavior intensified as Jack approached the box, and the dog positioned himself between Jack and the basement stairs, as if preparing to guard against intruders, while Jack investigated their discovery. The lock opened easily with Betty's key, and inside the metal box, Jack found materials that made his hands shake as he realized their implications. Hand-drawn maps of the surrounding mountains, marked with symbols and notations that clearly indicated geological surveys and mineral deposits. Photographs of rock samples that glittered with veins of what could only be gold, along with detailed notes in Harold's careful handwriting documenting the location and estimated value of multiple mining sites. But most disturbing of all was a manila folder filled with official documents, mining permits, land surveys, and legal agreements that all bore the signatures of prominent local officials. Detective Daniel Morrison's name appeared on dozens of documents, along with Mayor Marcus Webb and Judge Henry Brooks, all involved in what appeared to be a systematic effort to identify and illegally claim mineral rights throughout the Ozark Mountains. Harold's final journal entries painted a picture of a man who had stumbled across evidence of massive corruption and realized that his discovery had marked him and his family for death. The last entry, dated just 3 days before Harold's disappearance, contained a single chilling line. "They know I know. If something happens to us, the evidence is here. Find the truth and make them pay." Scout's sudden bark from the top of the basement stairs interrupted Jack's reading, and the urgency in the dog's voice made Jack immediately stuff the documents back into the metal box and grab the hunting rifle from where he'd leaned it against the wall. Through the basement's small windows, he could see flashlight beams moving through the trees surrounding the mobile home, and the sound of multiple vehicles approaching on the dirt road that led to their isolated location. Someone had been watching them, waiting for the right moment to move, and that moment had apparently arrived. As Jack climbed the basement stairs with Scout at his side, he could hear voices outside. Men talking in the low, professional tones of people who were accustomed to conducting dangerous business under cover of darkness. The evidence he'd just discovered painted a clear picture of corruption that reached to the highest levels of local government, involving millions of dollars in illegally obtained mineral rights, and at least one family that had been murdered to keep the secret safe. Now Jack and Scout were the only witnesses to Harold Hendricks's final testimony, and if the voices outside were any indication, they were about to face the same fate that had befallen the mobile home's previous occupants. Through the mobile home's front window, Jack could see at least 3 vehicles parked along the dirt road, their occupants moving with the coordinated precision of people who had done this sort of thing before. Scout pressed against Jack's leg, his body tense and ready for action, waiting for the command that would send him into the kind of combat they'd both hoped to leave behind in Afghanistan. But some battles choose you rather than the other way around. And as Jack checked the rifle's ammunition and prepared to defend both their lives and Harold's evidence, he realized that the war he thought he'd finished overseas was just beginning on American soil. Jack moved through the mobile home with the practiced efficiency of a soldier preparing for combat, while Scout took position by the front window where he could monitor the approaching threats without exposing himself to potential sniper fire. The voices outside had grown more organized and purposeful, with someone clearly coordinating the movement of multiple teams around the perimeter of the property. Jack recognized the tactical pattern. These weren't random criminals or opportunistic thieves, but people with military or law enforcement training who knew how to execute a coordinated assault on a fixed position. The metal box containing Harold's evidence was too bulky to carry if they needed to move quickly, so Jack made the crucial decision to photograph every document with his phone, uploading the images to cloud storage whenever his device managed to capture a weak signal. Scout's ears tracked the movement of their uninvited guests, and his low growls provided Jack with a continuous update on the approaching danger. Through the dog's body language, Jack could tell that at least 6 people were positioning themselves around the mobile home, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that suggested extensive planning and preparation. A powerful flashlight beam suddenly flooded through the front windows, followed by a voice amplified through a bullhorn that made Jack's blood run cold with its casual authority. "Jack Sullivan, this is Detective Daniel Morrison with the Arkansas County Sheriff's Department. We have a warrant to search these premises for stolen property and evidence of illegal mining activities. You have 30 seconds to exit the mobile home with your hands visible and submit to questioning." Scout's reaction to Morrison's voice was immediate and unmistakable. His hackles rose and he bared his teeth in a snarl that Jack had only seen him display when facing genuine enemies in Afghanistan. Jack knew immediately that Morrison's claim about having a warrant was almost certainly false. No legitimate law enforcement operation would be conducted in the middle of the night without proper backup and procedural safeguards. This was an elimination operation designed to look like a routine police action, and Jack's military experience told him that Morrison and his team had no intention of leaving witnesses alive to testify about what they'd discovered in Harold's hidden evidence cache. The detective's 30-second ultimatum was nothing more than a psychological pressure tactic designed to force Jack into a vulnerable position where he could be easily controlled or eliminated. Instead of responding to Morrison's demands, Jack used those 30 seconds to prepare for a siege. He moved Harold's evidence box to the most secure location he could find, a reinforced corner of the basement where it would be protected from small arms fire and explosive devices. Scout seemed to understand the gravity of their situation and positioned himself to guard the basement entrance while maintaining visual contact with Jack's movements. The dog's military training was evident in the way he automatically assumed a defensive posture that would allow him to respond quickly to threats from multiple directions. When Morrison's deadline expired without a response, the true nature of their visit became immediately apparent. Instead of attempting to serve a legitimate warrant or establish communication, Morrison's team began systematically cutting the mobile home's power lines and phone connections, isolating Jack and Scout from any potential outside assistance. The sound of boots moving around the perimeter of the building told Jack that they were being surrounded by people who had no intention of following proper law enforcement procedures. This was an assassination operation, pure and simple, designed to eliminate the last witnesses to a multi-million-dollar conspiracy. Scout's warning bark alerted Jack to movement at the back of the mobile home, where someone was attempting to force entry through a window that had been left unlocked. Jack positioned himself with a clear line of sight to the potential breach point, while Scout moved to cover the front entrance where Morrison's voice had originated. The coordination between them was automatic and instinctive, refined through dozens of combat situations where their lives had depended on perfect communication and mutual trust. They were no longer a veteran and his dog hiding in a decrepit mobile home. They were a combat team preparing to defend their position against superior numbers. The first real assault came through the back window, where a figure in dark clothing attempted to climb silently into the mobile home's kitchen area. Jack's first shot, aimed deliberately high as a warning, splintered the window frame and sent the intruder tumbling backward into the snow with a cry of pain and surprise. The shot also served as a signal to Morrison and his team that Jack was armed and prepared to defend himself, transforming what they had probably hoped would be a quick and quiet elimination into a potentially prolonged and noisy confrontation that might attract unwanted attention. Morrison's voice came through the bullhorn again, but this time, the pretense of legitimate law enforcement had been abandoned entirely. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Sullivan. We know you found Harold's evidence, and we know you're smart enough to understand what it means. Give us the documents, and we'll make this quick and painless. Keep fighting, and we'll make sure you suffer before you die, just like Harold and his family did." The casual admission of murder was clearly intended to demoralize Jack and convince him that resistance was futile, but it had the opposite effect. It confirmed that everything in Harold's evidence cache was true, and that surrender would mean certain death. Scout's response to Morrison's threat was immediate and visceral. The dog's snarl was audible even through the mobile home's walls, and Jack could see his partner's body language shift into the aggressive posture that had preceded his attacks on Taliban fighters in Afghanistan. The German Shepherd understood enough of Morrison's words to recognize the threat they represented, and his military training was telling him to prepare for combat against enemies who had already proven their willingness to kill innocent people. Jack reached down to scratch behind Scout's ears, a gesture that served both to calm the dog and to confirm their mutual commitment to fighting together against whatever came next. The next phase of Morrison's assault involved attempts to smoke Jack and Scout out of the mobile home by setting fires around the perimeter of the building. The smell of burning wood and plastic began filtering through the walls, and Jack realized that Morrison's team was prepared to burn down the entire structure rather than risk leaving evidence of their illegal activities. This escalation confirmed Jack's assessment that they were dealing with people who had extensive resources and absolutely no regard for due process or human life. The fire tactic also revealed something important about Morrison's timeline. He needed to conclude this operation quickly, before the smoke and flames attracted attention from other residents or emergency services. Jack's response to the fire threat demonstrated both his military engineering background and his deep understanding of Scout's capabilities. Rather than allowing themselves to be driven from the mobile home by smoke inhalation, Jack led Scout down to the basement where Harold's mining expertise had created a space with its own ventilation system and multiple potential exit routes. The basement also contained emergency supplies that Harold had apparently stockpiled. Bottled water, canned food, flashlights, and additional ammunition for the hunting rifle that suggested the old miner had been preparing for exactly this kind of confrontation. Scout's behavior in the basement revealed something that Jack hadn't noticed during their initial exploration. The dog kept returning to a particular section of the east wall, pawing at what appeared to be solid earth, but sniffing with the intensity he normally reserved for detecting buried explosives. Jack's investigation of the area revealed that Harold had constructed a hidden tunnel leading from the basement to a natural cave system that extended deep into the mountainside. The tunnel was narrow and would require crawling to navigate, but it represented a potential escape route that Morrison's team probably didn't know existed. The discovery of Harold's tunnel system also revealed the true scope of the old miner's preparations for the confrontation he knew was coming. The cave system connected to the basement contained a sophisticated communications setup, including a radio capable of reaching emergency services outside Morrison's probable sphere of influence. Harold had also stockpiled weapons, ammunition, and survival gear in quantities that suggested he had been planning for a prolonged siege or guerrilla campaign against Morrison's organization. Most importantly, he had created detailed maps of the entire cave and tunnel network, showing multiple escape routes and defensive positions that could be used to outmaneuver enemies who were unfamiliar with the underground terrain. Jack's military mind immediately grasped the tactical advantages that Harold's preparation had provided them. The cave system would allow them to move freely, while Morrison's team was limited to the surface, where they would be visible and vulnerable to observation or attack. The radio equipment would enable Jack to call for legitimate law enforcement assistance once they were far enough from Morrison's immediate area of control. Most crucially, the extensive tunnel network meant that they were no longer trapped in a single location where Morrison could simply surround them and wait for fire or smoke to force them into the open. Scout's exploration of the tunnel system revealed that he was perfectly suited for this type of underground movement. His size and agility allowed him to navigate spaces that would be challenging for human attackers, and his enhanced senses would provide early warning of any attempts to follow them through the tunnels. The dog's obvious familiarity with confined spaces reminded Jack of their experiences clearing tunnel complexes in Afghanistan, where Scout's ability to detect hidden enemies had saved countless lives. Now those same skills would be essential for their survival in a very different kind of underground warfare. The sound of Morrison's team breaking into the mobile home above them confirmed that the detective had grown impatient with the siege approach and was moving to a direct assault. Jack could hear multiple sets of boots moving through the rooms overhead, along with voices coordinating the search for Harold's evidence and their quarry. The fact that Morrison was willing to enter the mobile home personally suggested that he was under significant pressure to recover Harold's documents quickly, probably from higher-level conspirators who were growing nervous about the extended timeline and potential exposure. As Jack and Scout prepared to enter Harold's tunnel system, carrying essential supplies and the most critical pieces of evidence, Jack realized that their situation had evolved from a defensive action into the opening moves of an underground campaign that could determine the fate of everyone involved in the conspiracy that had killed Harold's family. Morrison might have superior numbers and resources on the surface, but Harold's 3 years of preparation had created an underground battlefield where determination and knowledge of the terrain would be more important than firepower. The hunt was about to begin, and this time, Jack and Scout would be the ones setting the terms of engagement. The tunnel system Harold had created was a masterpiece of desperate engineering, carved through solid rock with the patience and precision of a man who knew his life depended on every detail. Scout led the way through the narrow passage, his enhanced senses providing early warning of air currents, structural weaknesses, and potential obstacles that could trap them underground. Jack followed close behind, carrying Harold's most critical evidence and the weapons they would need for the confrontation that was rapidly approaching. The sound of Morrison's team searching the mobile home above grew fainter as they moved deeper into the mountain. But Jack knew their temporary advantage would disappear once Morrison realized his quarry had escaped through an exit he didn't know existed. The main cave chamber Harold had prepared as his command center was larger than Jack had expected, with natural limestone formations providing both structural support and acoustic dampening that would prevent sound from traveling to the surface. Harold's radio equipment was more sophisticated than anything Jack had seen outside of military installations, with multiple frequency scanners and communication devices that could reach law enforcement agencies throughout Arkansas and beyond. Most importantly, Harold had maintained detailed logs of Morrison's activities for the past 3 years, documenting patterns of movement, associates, and operational procedures that would be invaluable for understanding how the conspiracy functioned and who else might be involved at higher levels. The cave walls were lined with carefully organized supplies: canned food with dates going back 3 years, medical supplies that indicated Harold had been treating his own injuries during his underground exile, and weapons that ranged from hunting rifles to military-grade equipment that Harold must have acquired through channels Jack didn't want to contemplate. Maps covered every available surface, showing not just the cave system, but detailed topographical surveys of the entire mountain region, with notations in Harold's handwriting that indicated potential escape routes, observation points, and defensive positions that could be used against pursuing forces. Scout's behavior in the cave system revealed capabilities that went beyond his military training. The dog seemed to have an intuitive understanding of underground navigation that allowed him to identify safe passages, unstable areas, and potential escape routes with remarkable accuracy. Jack realized that Scout's experience detecting buried explosives in Afghanistan had developed his ability to read subsurface conditions and structural integrity, skills that were proving essential for survival in Harold's elaborate underground fortress. The cave system was extensive enough to provide multiple defensive positions and escape routes, but it also presented the risk of becoming lost or trapped if they didn't maintain careful navigation and communication protocols. Morrison's voice echoed through the cave system from somewhere above, filtered through rock and earth but still clearly audible and filled with frustrated rage. The mobile home was empty, but there were signs of recent occupation and hasty departure. They couldn't have gone far on foot in this weather, and there's only one road leading away from this location. Tommy, take 3 men and start searching the surrounding area. Webb, get on the radio and coordinate roadblocks at every intersection within 20 miles. Nobody leaves this area alive. The casual reference to Mayor Webb confirmed Jack's understanding of the conspiracy's scope and made it clear that Morrison had resources and authority that extended far beyond normal law enforcement capabilities. Jack activated Harold's radio equipment and began scanning frequencies used by legitimate law enforcement agencies, hoping to establish contact with federal authorities who might be investigating the conspiracy. What he discovered instead was even more disturbing. Additional radio traffic indicating that Morrison's operation was much larger than the team currently searching the mobile home. Vehicle movement reports suggested that at least 20 people were involved in tonight's operation, with roadblocks being established at strategic locations throughout the county and helicopter support being coordinated through what appeared to be legitimate channels, but was actually part of the conspiracy's cover story. Scout's reconnaissance of the cave system revealed that Harold had been extraordinarily thorough in his preparations for underground warfare. Hidden caches of supplies were positioned at strategic locations throughout the network, containing food, water, medical supplies, ammunition, and communication equipment that would allow sustained operations for weeks or even months. Harold had also created detailed maps showing every entrance, exit, and connection point in the cave system, along with notes about seasonal water levels, air quality, and structural stability that demonstrated his deep understanding of the underground environment he had chosen as his final battlefield. The radio equipment Harold had installed allowed Jack to monitor Morrison's communications with his team and coordination with higher-level conspirators. The conversations Jack intercepted revealed the true scope of the criminal enterprise that had killed Harold's family, a systematic effort to identify and illegally claim mineral rights throughout the Ozark Mountains, involving millions of dollars in stolen resources and multiple government officials who had been bought or coerced into participation. Morrison's desperation to recover Harold's evidence was driven by the knowledge that exposure would bring down not just him, but an entire network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of state government. Jack discovered Harold's personal journal among the cave supplies, and reading it provided crucial insight into the 3 years of planning and preparation that had created their current advantages. Harold had not simply been hiding underground. He had been conducting his own investigation into the conspiracy, gathering additional evidence, and preparing for the confrontation he knew would eventually come. The journal revealed that Harold had been in contact with federal investigators for months before his family's murder, providing information about the illegal mining operation and the officials involved in covering it up. Tommy Hendricks emerged as Morrison's most reliable lieutenant, demonstrating a combination of local knowledge and ruthless efficiency that made him particularly dangerous to Jack and Scout's survival. Through intercepted radio communications, Jack learned that Tommy had been involved in the actual murders of Harold's family and had intimate knowledge of the cave systems and mountain terrain that could neutralize many of the advantages Harold's preparations had provided. Tommy's voice carried the casual brutality of someone who had killed before and would not hesitate to kill again, making him a priority target if Jack and Scout were going to survive long enough to expose the conspiracy. Mayor Marcus Webb's involvement in the operation became clear through his coordination of resources and personnel that extended far beyond Morrison's official authority. Webb was using his political connections to mobilize additional law enforcement assets, create false justifications for the expanded search operation, and coordinate with Judge Henry Brooks to provide legal cover for what was essentially a military-style assault on American citizens. The scope of Webb's involvement demonstrated that the conspiracy had deep roots in the local power structure and would be extremely difficult to expose through normal channels. Scout's alert behavior suddenly intensified as he detected movement in the cave system that indicated Morrison's team had discovered at least one of the tunnel entrances. The dog's body language shifted into the aggressive posture that preceded combat, and Jack realized that their period of relative safety was ending. Morrison had apparently brought people with underground experience, possibly miners or cavers who could navigate tunnel systems with the expertise needed to pursue Jack and Scout into Harold's prepared positions. The hunt was transitioning from a surface search operation to underground warfare, where both sides would have significant advantages and disadvantages. Jack's assessment of their tactical situation was complicated by the arrival of reinforcements for Morrison's team. Vehicle sounds and radio chatter indicated that additional personnel were arriving with specialized equipment for underground operations. The intercepted communications revealed that Morrison had contacted private military contractors who specialized in confined space operations, suggesting that the conspiracy had access to resources and expertise that went far beyond local law enforcement capabilities. These developments meant that Jack and Scout were no longer facing a desperate improvised search, but a professional military operation with substantial logistical support. The cave system's complexity became both an advantage and a challenge as Jack and Scout moved through passages that Harold's maps indicated led to multiple exit points and defensive positions. Some tunnels required crawling through spaces barely large enough for a human body, while others opened into caverns large enough to house vehicles. Scout's ability to navigate these varied environments was remarkable, but Jack could see that even the German Shepherd's exceptional endurance was being tested by the physical demands of underground movement and the constant stress of evading armed pursuit. Harold's journal revealed that he had spent considerable effort creating false trails and dead ends within the cave system, designed to confuse and delay anyone attempting to track him through the tunnels. Some passages had been deliberately collapsed to create barriers, while others had been rigged with simple but effective early warning systems that would alert defenders to approaching enemies. Jack activated several of these systems as they moved through the cave network, creating additional layers of protection and early warning that would help them maintain their tactical advantages. The first direct confrontation came when Tommy and two other men entered the cave system through the tunnel entrance Harold had concealed behind a rockfall. Scout's warning allowed Jack to prepare an ambush at a choke point where the tunnel narrowed and attackers would be forced to approach single file. Jack's first shot, carefully aimed to disable rather than kill, struck Tommy in the shoulder and sent him tumbling backward into his companions. The confined space amplified the sound of the gunshot and created confusion that allowed Jack and Scout to withdraw to prepared positions deeper in the cave system. Tommy's wounded condition didn't prevent him from continuing to coordinate the search, but it did reveal important information about Morrison's operational priorities and timeline pressures. Through Tommy's radio communications with Morrison, Jack learned that the conspiracy was under investigation by federal authorities and that tonight's operation was their last chance to eliminate witnesses and recover evidence before FBI agents arrived to take control of the situation. This intelligence confirmed Jack's assessment that survival until dawn would likely result in legitimate law enforcement intervention that could expose the entire conspiracy. Morrison's response to the ambush demonstrated both his tactical limitations and his growing desperation about the operation's timeline and visibility. Instead of adapting his approach to the underground environment, Morrison ordered his team to use explosive devices to collapse sections of the cave system, apparently believing that destroying Harold's underground fortress would eliminate both Jack and the evidence he carried. This decision revealed Morrison's fundamental misunderstanding of the cave system's geology and structure. Harold had chosen his location specifically because the limestone formations would contain explosions rather than propagating them throughout the network. The sound of approaching helicopters added a new dimension to the tactical situation, as Morrison's team gained aerial reconnaissance and potential extraction capabilities that could neutralize many of Jack and Scout's advantages. However, the helicopter presence also increased the visibility of Morrison's operation and the likelihood that legitimate authorities would begin asking questions about the massive law enforcement response to what was supposed to be a routine investigation. Jack realized that Morrison was caught between the need to eliminate witnesses quickly and the growing risk that his operation would attract federal attention before he could complete his mission. Scout's behavior during the explosion attempts showed his remarkable adaptability and courage under extreme stress. Each detonation created noise, dust, and debris that would have panicked most animals, but Scout remained focused on his protective mission and continued to provide early warning of approaching threats. The dog's ability to navigate through smoke and debris while maintaining awareness of multiple potential danger sources reminded Jack of their most challenging operations in Afghanistan, where Scout had proven that his loyalty and determination could overcome almost any obstacle. The explosion-induced cave-ins had an unexpected consequence that worked in Jack and Scout's favor. Several of Morrison's team members became trapped in collapsed sections of the tunnel system, forcing Morrison to divert resources to rescue operations rather than continuing the pursuit. Jack could hear Morrison's increasingly frantic radio communications as he realized that his tactical approach was not only failing to eliminate his targets, but was also creating casualties among his own people and generating the kind of visible emergency response that would attract unwanted attention from legitimate authorities. Judge Brooks's voice appeared on Morrison's radio frequency, providing legal justification and coordination for expanded search operations that would bring additional law enforcement assets under Morrison's control. Brooks was clearly the highest-ranking member of the conspiracy, with the authority to issue warrants, coordinate with state agencies, and provide legal cover for what was essentially an assassination operation disguised as law enforcement activity. His involvement confirmed that the conspiracy reached into the judicial system itself, and that normal legal processes would be insufficient to ensure justice for Harold's family. Jack discovered that Harold had anticipated even this level of official corruption and had prepared contingency plans that included direct communication with federal agencies outside Arkansas's jurisdiction. Hidden among Harold's radio equipment was a secure satellite communication device that could reach FBI headquarters directly, bypassing all local and state law enforcement channels that might be compromised by the conspiracy. Jack activated the device and began transmitting Harold's evidence along with real-time updates about Morrison's operation, creating an official federal record that would survive even if Jack and Scout didn't. The turning point in the underground battle came when Scout detected the approach of Morrison himself, who had apparently decided that personal involvement was necessary to conclude the operation successfully. Morrison's movement through the cave system was clumsy and noisy compared to his subordinates, but his determination and desperation made him extremely dangerous. Jack realized that Morrison's presence in the tunnels represented both an opportunity and a significant risk. Capturing or eliminating the detective would cripple the conspiracy's operational capability, but Morrison's law enforcement training and desperation would make him a formidable opponent in close-quarters combat. Scout's attack on Morrison in the narrow confines of the tunnel system demonstrated the full extent of his combat training and protective instincts. The German Shepherd's speed and agility in confined spaces allowed him to reach Morrison before the detective could bring his weapons to bear effectively. Scout's assault focused on disabling Morrison's ability to use firearms, biting his gun hand, and dragging him to the ground where his size and equipment advantages became liabilities rather than assets. Jack's arrival at the scene of Scout's attack gave him the opportunity to disarm Morrison completely and take control of the detective's radio equipment. Morrison's capture provided Jack with crucial intelligence about the conspiracy's scope, timeline, and vulnerabilities. Under interrogation, Morrison revealed that the illegal mining operation had been active for over 15 years and involved systematic fraud that had stolen millions of dollars in mineral rights from legitimate landowners throughout Arkansas. Harold's family had been murdered not just to prevent exposure of the current operation, but to prevent investigation of historical crimes that would implicate dozens of officials and business leaders in ongoing criminal enterprise. The revelation that emerged during Morrison's interrogation was even more shocking than Jack had anticipated. The conspiracy wasn't limited to illegal mining operations, but included systematic murder of witnesses, intimidation of federal investigators, and corruption that reached into multiple state governments throughout the region. Morrison had been operating as part of a network that had killed dozens of people over the past 15 years, using his law enforcement authority to cover up crimes and eliminate anyone who threatened to expose the operation. Webb's increasingly frantic radio communications indicated that the conspiracy was beginning to collapse under the weight of its own ambitions and the growing federal attention that Morrison's heavy-handed tactics had attracted. The mayor was apparently receiving pressure from higher-level conspirators who were concerned about exposure and were beginning to consider eliminating Morrison himself to prevent his testimony from implicating them. Jack realized that Morrison's capture had not just provided intelligence, but had also triggered a crisis within the conspiracy that could be exploited to ensure the safety of additional witnesses and victims. The final phase of the underground confrontation involved Jack's decision about Morrison's fate and the strategic implications of his capture. Keeping Morrison alive would provide ongoing intelligence and testimony that could expose the entire conspiracy, but it would also require resources and create risks that might compromise Jack and Scout's ability to escape and deliver Harold's evidence to federal authorities. The sound of additional vehicles and personnel arriving on the surface indicated that time was running out for any decision, and that the window for escape was closing rapidly as Morrison's backup plans came into effect. Scout's behavior throughout Morrison's interrogation demonstrated his understanding of the moral complexity of their situation. The dog remained alert and protective, but also showed signs of exhaustion and stress that indicated the limits of even his remarkable endurance and determination. Jack realized that their survival and success had pushed both of them to the edge of their physical and emotional capabilities, and that the final phase of their mission would require careful planning and precise execution if they were going to live long enough to see justice served for Harold's murdered family. 6 months after that terrifying night in the Ozark Mountains, Jack Sullivan stood in the lobby of the newly constructed Harold Hendricks Justice Center in Little Rock, watching as FBI Director Sarah Martinez unveiled a bronze plaque commemorating the victims of the Arkansas mining conspiracy. The federal investigation that had begun with Jack's satellite transmission from Harold's Cave had ultimately exposed corruption in 3 states' governments and resulted in 47 convictions, including Detective Daniel Morrison, Mayor Marcus Webb, and Judge Henry Brooks. Scout, now wearing a ceremonial service vest recognizing his contributions to the investigation, sat calmly beside Jack as cameras flashed and reporters documented the conclusion of what had become known as the largest public corruption case in Arkansas history. The financial settlement from the recovered mining rights had been substantial, Jack's legal ownership of the mineral claims Harold had discovered was worth over $60 million once legitimate mining operations began. But Jack had discovered that wealth meant nothing without purpose, and he had used the majority of his settlement to establish the foundation that now bore Harold's name. The center provided legal assistance to victims of government corruption, supported families of murdered witnesses, and maintained a specialized unit that investigated mining fraud throughout the southeastern United States. Scout had become the unofficial mascot of the foundation, providing comfort to traumatized witnesses and serving as a reminder that loyalty and courage could overcome even the most powerful criminal conspiracies. Betty Morrison had been one of the foundation's first beneficiaries, receiving both financial support and the psychological counseling she needed to recover from 3 years of living in terror while pretending ignorance about her son's crimes. The revelation that Detective Morrison had murdered his own half-brother for money had devastated Betty. But she had found purpose in helping other families torn apart by corruption and violence. She now lived in a comfortable apartment near the Foundation's headquarters, where she spent her days organizing support groups for relatives of crime victims and tending a memorial garden dedicated to Harold, his wife, and daughter. The personal transformation Jack had undergone during those months was perhaps more profound than the legal and financial changes. The PTSD that had dominated his life since returning from Afghanistan had been replaced by a sense of purpose and accomplishment that gave meaning to both his military service and his civilian struggles. Working with the Foundation's legal team to build cases against corrupt officials had provided Jack with the same sense of mission he had felt as a soldier, but without the moral ambiguity that had troubled him during his combat deployments. Scout's role in the Foundation's work had evolved far beyond what anyone could have anticipated when he first alerted Jack to the dangers lurking in Harold's mobile home. The German Shepherd had been trained to work with traumatized children whose parents had been murdered by corrupt officials, providing comfort and stability to young witnesses who were too frightened to testify without emotional support. Scout's presence in courtrooms had become legendary among prosecutors, who found that witnesses felt more confident and secure when the dog was nearby during their testimony. The bond between Jack and Scout had deepened through their shared mission, creating a partnership that transcended the traditional relationship between human and animal. The Foundation's investigative work had revealed that Harold's case was not unique. Similar patterns of corruption and murder existed in dozens of communities throughout the region, where powerful individuals used their positions to steal resources and eliminate anyone who threatened to expose their crimes. Jack and Scout traveled frequently to these communities, working with local activists and federal investigators to build cases against corrupt networks and provide support to witnesses who risked their lives by coming forward. Their reputation had spread throughout law enforcement circles, and they were frequently called upon to assist with cases involving witness intimidation and official corruption. The memorial service for Harold's family had been held on the first anniversary of Jack's discovery of the evidence that brought down the conspiracy. Hundreds of people attended, including federal agents, prosecutors, and families of other victims who had found justice through the Foundation's work. Jack delivered the eulogy, speaking about Harold's courage in documenting the corruption that ultimately cost him everything, and about the importance of ordinary citizens who refused to be silenced by powerful criminals. Scout sat beside the memorial throughout the ceremony, as if understanding that his role in exposing the truth had honored the memory of the family he had never met, but whose sacrifice had given meaning to his own service. The broader implications of the Arkansas mining conspiracy case had resonated throughout American law enforcement and political circles, leading to reforms in oversight procedures and whistleblower protection programs that were designed to prevent similar conspiracies from taking root in other jurisdictions. Jack had testified before congressional committees about the challenges faced by ordinary citizens who discovered evidence of high-level corruption, and his recommendations had been incorporated into federal legislation that strengthened protections for witnesses and expanded the resources available to investigate official misconduct. Sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the places that seem most cursed, and the most valuable discoveries come from having the courage to trust the loyal friend beside you, even when the whole world seems determined to destroy what you've found together. This had become Jack's philosophy as he reflected on the journey that had taken him from a desperate veteran with $350 to his name to a nationally recognized advocate for justice and governmental accountability. The mobile home that had seemed like his last option had actually been the doorway to a purpose and meaning that had transformed not just his own life, but the lives of countless others who had suffered under corrupt systems. The Foundation's work continued to expand, with new offices opening in 5 states and a staff of investigators, attorneys, and victim advocates who carried on the mission that had begun in Harold's underground command center. Jack and Scout remained at the center of these operations, but they had built an organization that could survive and thrive even without their direct involvement. The principles of loyalty, courage, and determination that had sustained them through their darkest moments had become the Foundation's core values, inspiring others to take risks and make sacrifices in the service of justice and truth. If you've ever had a loyal friend, whether human or animal, who stood by you during your darkest moments and helped you find the courage to fight for what was right, please share their story in the comments below. We want to honor all the heroes, both two-legged and four-legged, who make the difference between despair and hope when everything seems lost. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories about the unbreakable bonds between veterans and their faithful companions, and the extraordinary things that can happen when loyalty and courage meet corruption and injustice. These stories remind us that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they refuse to give up and stand together against impossible odds. Click on the video appearing on your screen right now to watch our next story about a disabled veteran and his service dog who uncovered a conspiracy that saved an entire community from disaster. Thank you to all the veterans, their families, and their loyal companions who continue to serve and protect long after their official duty has ended.